Hello, everybody. We are live. Hello, everybody. We are live. We are live, live. Now, I'm going to be doing chapter 18 today. In 2 days, on Sunday, after Shabbat ends, I will be doing. Let me check my calendar real quick because I think. Hold on. Yom Kippur is actually okay. Um, so actually, what I'll do is I'm going to do live today, live tomorrow, and live on Sun. You get the idea. So every day, make it a lot easier. Okay, so let's begin. Chapter 18. When Jesus had spoken these words, he went out with his disciples over the brook Kidron. The brook is a brook of water, kind of like a small stream. Okay, where there was a garden. Okay, I'm just going to ignore this stupid action needed thing that always keeps popping up because it gets on my nerves. And where there was a garden which he and his disciples entered. So, since I don't see little mama here, I'm going to drop this first verse. It is 2 Samuel chapter 15, verse 23. Oh, now you're here. Okay, good. Now you're showing up. So now you can do the following verses. Okay, first one was done already. And Judas, who betrayed him, also knew the place, for Jesus often met there with his disciples. So the place where Jesus was betrayed, it was known to Judas Iscariot. That's how Judas Iscariot turned him over. Now remember, this is biblical prophecy being fulfilled. So God Almighty would make sure that the people would know where Jesus was so that Jesus would be crucified. Because that was God's plan. You would say, okay, well, what parent would send his kid to die? Well, the ultimate godly one, the one who knew, okay, the decision to send his son to die for us was for the purpose of saving so many. So he's looking at it, God's looking at it as, I'm sending one to die for many. So all I got to do is go through a little suffering of watching my son die, just a little time, and then all of creation of mankind is going to be able to they're going to be able to actually they're going to be able to actually get saved through that one small sacrifice. Okay, and yes, it was a huge sacrifice, but you get the idea. Okay, then Judas, having received a detachment of troops, so basically Judas Iscariot, after choosing to betray Jesus, was given officers of the chief priests and Pharisees, so basically the soldiers of the chief priests and Pharisees, to go help capture Jesus because they expected the resistance. Okay. And they came there with lanterns to see where they're walking, and torches in case they had to burn anybody, and weapons in case anybody created any issue. Common sense kind of stuff. Jesus, therefore, knowing all these things that would come upon him, went forward and said to them, whom are you seeking? Okay. Whom are you seeking? Now, Christ knows who he's seeking. Okay. But he's catching them off guard when he's doing this. Okay. In other words, Christ is meeting the enemy on his own terms. Okay. They answered him, Jesus of Nazareth. Now, when it says they, it means the whole crowd. So all the soldiers and stuff. Now, Judas knew who he was, but everybody else knew who he was. But, what reason there was for needing to identify which one was Jesus, I don't know. Because as we know, Jesus talked to many people in the cities. He was well known, so I'm sure his face was familiar. Okay. Jesus said to them, I am he. And Judas, who betrayed him, also betrayed him with it doesn't say betrayed him with a kiss, but we know he betrayed him with a kiss. And Judas, who betrayed him, also stood with them, meaning with the enemies. Okay, so that shows which side Judas Iscariot was on. The verse here is Psalms chapter 41, verse 9. Psalms chapter 41, verse 9. Okay. Psalms chapter 41, verse 9. Okay. And now he said to them, I am he. They drew back and fell to the ground. Okay, so they drew back and they fell to the ground. So this would be evidence of like an overwhelming presence of recognizing who he is and being overcome by the presence of Christ in that moment. Because it's not by accident that they took a step back, so they're like, caught off guard. But then they go down on their knees. So the enemy fell to the ground. The enemy fell to the ground. Okay. When he said, I am he. Okay. Because that's more evidence of him being God than it is just saying, okay, I'm the person you're seeking. Okay. Then he asked them again, whom are you seeking? And they said, Jesus of Nazareth. And Jesus said, I have told you that I am he, for if you seek me, let these go their way. In other words, let everyone who is here with me, let them leave. That the saying might be fulfilled. Now, why was this going on? So we're going to learn why he said this. That the saying might be fulfilled, whom he spoke. Of those whom you gave me, I have lost none. In other words, Christ is saying, I don't want my children with me at this time because if they do, they're going to die. And I don't want to lose any of my children before I'm able to save them. Because remember, this is before Christ died on the cross, which means at this point, there is no crucifixion that's happened for all mankind. So there's a purpose, even for what seems purposeless, that his disciples would scatter and abandon it, right? Even in that abandoning, there's still purpose. Okay. That none of the sheep shall be lost, okay, or die. Because if they died beforehand, they might not be worthy enough to enter into heaven. But if they die after Christ dies, then they can be covered over the law of grace instead of the law of the law. In other words, they'll be in the new covenant, which is the covenant of grace versus the covenant of the law, which Abraham was under the covenant of the law, whereas you and me are under the covenant of grace. Okay. Then Simon Peter, having a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's servant, the servant of the high priest, and cut off his right ear. Okay. Now, I don't think it's coincidence that the word right is sticking out to me, because I see the word right and the first thing pops in my mind is, where is Christ sitting? At the right hand of God. Right hand of God, right ear. There's always connections if you look for it. Okay. The servant's name was Malchus. That's the servant whose ear was cut off. So Jesus said to Peter, put your sword into the sheath, meaning put it away. Shall I not drink the cup which my Father has given me? In other words, my Father has sent me here for a purpose, to die on the cross for your sins, so that you can have a relationship with God, so that you can go to heaven and not be cast into hell. Okay. Should I not fulfill that desire of my Father? Is what he's saying. Okay. You silly girl. Yes, it's Psalms chapter 41, verse 9, but you put 41-9. I'm going to laugh at that. Almost looking like Psalms chapter 41 through chapter 49. I mean, through chapter 9. Woo! That's hilarious. Then the detachment of the troops, the people that came with Judas Iscariot, and the captain of the officers, this would be the head officer, okay, the very top officer of the captain of the officers of the Jews, arrested Jesus, and they bound him. They tied him. Now, he could have snapped his finger and broke out of those bindings easy, but if he had, would the price for our sins have been paid if he refused to be sacrificed? How do I put this way? In your life, there will be situations that you won't understand why they're happening. And there will be situations that you think there is no good purpose for this. But God always has a purpose for every single thing that happens, big or small. And just because you can't understand the purpose doesn't mean there's not a purpose. Okay? And after they bound him, they led him away to Annas first. I'm assuming Annas is a city. For he was the father-in-law of Caiaphas. Oh, Annas is a person. So they led him to the father-in-law of Caiaphas, which is Annas. Caiaphas, who was the high priest of that year. Okay. Now, it was Caiaphas who advised the Jews that it was expedient, or it was important, that one man should die for the people. He convinced them to say, it's better that Christ die than for all the other people die. And in essence, this is true. It's much better. Basically, in layman's terms, there's a secret message here, okay, that it's better for the one lamb to be sacrificed than for all the people to go to hell. There's a hidden message within that passage, and that's the message, okay? Because although Caiaphas is talking about, let's kill Christ so that the rest of us can walk in glory according to the way of God. And little mama, I don't know if you're redoing that verse, that Psalms verse or not. You probably are. So if you are, I'll wait for it. If not, then I'll do it myself. Because I just saw it disappear. Anyway, that's the purpose why. So even though this is talking about them killing Christ. Hello, Anita. How are you? Even though they're talking about them killing Christ in order that the rest of the Jews can follow the law of Moses as they wanted to do instead of the law of God. This has a secret meaning talking about one man, Christ, being sacrificed instead of all the people who want to know and have a relationship with God being sent to hell because they're unworthy. And Simon Peter followed Jesus and so did another disciple. It doesn't say who. Now that disciple was well known to the high priest and went to Jesus into the courtyard of the high priest. But Peter stood at the door. So one disciple managed to have enough boldness to go into the thing. So I'll just go ahead and put this in here in case you forget. And if it pops up that you are redoing it or rewriting it, then I'll go ahead and delete mine. So anyway, the one disciple that they don't mention the name has enough guts to be inside of the courtyard of the high priest where they're judging Jesus. But Simon Peter was scared, so he backed away. But Peter stood at the door outside. Then the other disciple, who was well known to the high priest, went out and spoke to her who kept the door, spoke to the person who kept the door and brought Peter in. So this would be the doorkeeper. Okay. This would be the doorkeeper. Okay. And they brought Peter in. Then the servant girl who kept the door, that's the servant girl. So the servant girl who recognized Peter, right? That's the person that the other disciples spoke to. Okay. Who kept the door said to Peter, you are not also one of this man's disciples, are you? So he's asking. Yeah, I know you're here. I see your comments. Okay. I just didn't know if you're doing the Psalms 41:9 fixing it or whatever, so that's why I put it in there. And if you are going to do it yourself, then I'll delete mine once I see yours pop up. Anyway, the servant girl. So there's connections all over the place. You just got to look for the signs. And he said, are you not one of these man's disciples? And he said, I am not. So he's lying. He's committing a sin and he's denying Christ at the same time. Now the servants and the officers who had made a fire of coals stood there, for it was cold. It was not warm, it was cold. Okay. And they warmed themselves. And Peter stood with them and warmed himself. So the purpose that Peter was nearby to be recognized was to get warm. So that was the purpose. So now we're into the second part of verse. I think I'm late to watch that. That's why I'm listening. Okay, no worries. And I'm getting messages left and right. So sorry. Someone's asking for the link for the site. So anyway, let's continue. The high priest then asked Jesus. So the high priest is Caiaphas, obviously. The high priest asked Jesus about his disciples and his doctrine. So he's inquiring about his disciples. Maybe he's looking to get more people to kill. And he's asking about the doctrines that Jesus taught. Jesus answered him and said, I spoke openly to the world. I wasn't in hiding. It wasn't like people came into my secret house and learned secretly. No, I spoke in the streets, in the world, in the fields. I also taught in the synagogues, which would be churches, and in the temple, which would be the high church, okay, where the Jews always meet. And in secret, I have said nothing. Okay. Why do you ask me? Why do you ask me? Why do you ask me? Ask those who have heard me what I said to them. Indeed, indeed, they know what I've said. In other words, you don't need to take my word at it because you're not going to believe my word even if I say it. So go ask the ones that I've spoken to. Go ask the ones who've heard me. Okay. And when he had said those things, one of the officers who stood by struck Jesus with the palm of his hand. So that would be like this. That would be like this, taking your hand and going, bang. Okay. Or maybe it's a smack, but palm of your hand is this part right down here. So they hit Jesus with the palm of his hand, saying, do you answer the high priest like that? So this is like how dare you speak to the high priest in such a manner? Okay. The verse here is Jeremiah chapter 20, verse 2. Now, if I'm understanding that correctly, why that verse is there, if I remember this verse correctly, this is in reference to the prophecy that the Messiah would be struck with the palm of a hand, which I believe. Okay. So I think that's why they're listing that. But it's Jeremiah chapter 20, verse 2. Jesus answered him, if I have spoken evil, bear witness of my evil. In other words, tell me what evil I've spoken. But if well, meaning if I've done good things, if I've only done goodness, why do you strike me? Why do you strike me if I've done good? Then Annas, who's the I believe the father. I have to look back real quick. Yep, father-in-law. Sorry, the father-in-law. Then Annas sent, who's the father-in-law of Caiaphas, sent him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest. So when so it's giving you two different scenarios. So it's elaborating on the story where we think that Jesus is immediately getting taken to Caiaphas, where he doesn't. He first gets taken to Annas, which is Caiaphas's father-in-law first. Then he gets taken to Caiaphas after. Okay, so the one that's inquiring of Jesus is Annas first. Then he gets taken to Caiaphas after. Okay. So Peter basically elaborating. In John, we get explanation of it's not one single setting where Peter denies Christ. It's two settings. The first setting where Peter denies Christ once, okay, is with Annas, when he meets with Annas, to talk with Annas, okay? And then Peter denies Christ two more times when Christ meets with Caiaphas, okay? Now Simon Peter stood and warned himself. Therefore they said to him, "You are not also one of his disciples, are you?" He denied it and said, "I am not." One of the servants of the high priest, a relative, so someone who's a relative of the one that had his ear cut off, that Peter cut off, said, "Did I not see you in the garden with him?" So that indicates that that person who's identifying Peter was in the garden when they arrested Christ. Okay. Peter then denied again, and immediately the rooster crowed. Okay. So now, oh, I was wrong. No, actually, I was right. Sorry, I was right. So, first denial was when he met with Annas. I was right in my understanding. So, first denial was when he was with Annas, if I'm saying that right, the father-in-law of Caiaphas, who's the high priest at that year. And then the two other denials come when he meets with Caiaphas. Okay. So then they led Jesus from Caiaphas to the praetorium, and it was early morning. Okay. So, but they themselves did not go into the praetorium. So I'm going to look up that word real quick for you. I think we looked it up before, but I forget what it was. So I'm going to look it up in my dictionary. Okay. So that's a praetor. Okay, well, that doesn't say it, so I have to look it up on the computer. Spell this right. Where is it? Where is it? Okay. So a praetorium in Roman history is the headquarters or the residence of a Roman official, governor, or military. So in this connection of this verse, they led Jesus from Caiaphas's place to where Pontius Pilate's home residence is. So this would be that's what would be that residence or that place. That's what they mean by praetorium. And it was early morning. But they themselves did not go into this place, lest they should be defiled. So the Jews felt it a defilement if they went into the place. where Romans were, and so they didn't associate with them, and so they wouldn't be defiled, but that they might eat the Passover. So for their own self gratification, they were like, no, we can't do this, we can't do this. We want to be able to eat the Passover. We want to be able to do the Passover. Even though they're doing something evil, they want to pretend like they're doing nothing wrong. Pilate then went out to them and said, what accusation do you bring against this man? They answered and said to him, if he were not an evildoer, we would not have delivered him up to you. No. See, they're lying in that. Okay, he's not an evildoer. They just think he's an evildoer. It's because they don't have the discernment of the Spirit of God to discern who he actually is, that he actually is the Son of God, and that he actually is God in the flesh. Okay, poured in, God's Spirit poured into a human body, basically. Okay, and they didn't realize that, and so when they say evildoer, they're basically saying he says he's equal with God, and we're taking great offense to that, so we're going to have a big problem with that, and that's why we're delivering him over to you. But they're trying to pretend as if they're doing some justified favor for the Romans. Okay, then Pilate said to them, you take him and judge him according to your laws. I don't want to be involved with this. You judge him according to your laws. You take him back to your area. Okay. And therefore the Jews said, it is not lawful for us to put anyone to death. Okay, so they didn't just want to judge him, they wanted to put someone to death. Now, that's actually biblical. In the Bible it says, thou shalt not kill. Okay, so they're trying to stick to the Moses law as justification for making someone else kill Christ, so that they themselves could have clean hands. But little did they know, they didn't have clean hands, because the reason Christ went to the cross was because everyone had bloody hands. Every single man, woman, and child alive had bloody hands that were bloody of sin. Okay? And the reason they did that is that the saying of Jesus might be fulfilled, which he spoke, signifying by what death he would die, that I would be crucified. So Christ is fulfilling his own words by this event happening, that they all don't want to kill him themselves. Okay. Then Pontius Pilate, entered the praetorium again, the building, called Jesus in, and said to him, are you the king of the Jews? Jesus answered him, are you speaking for yourself about this? Meaning, do you really want to know who I am? Or did others tell you this concerning me? Meaning, are you seriously interested in who I am? Or is it that you heard who I am and you're trying to verify information? Pilate answered and said, am I a Jew? Your own nation and your own chief priests have delivered you over to me. What have you done? Because Pilate doesn't know what's transpired. He wasn't there with all these teachings of Jesus. He wasn't there to hear Jesus talk. He wasn't there for none of this other stuff. Okay, so he's only hearing of it by word of mouth. And this is the problem with word of mouth. If you're only listening to stories that are passed on from someone else, you can get that person who's passing on that story can get that story wrong. Okay, example. If you go to my kid's mother is going to give you a twisted version of the story of what really happened with our marriage, okay, that we had. However, in order to know the truth, you have to learn both sides of the coin. In other words, to know the truth, and this is something I've learned. Whenever you have two sides of the coin, meaning two sides of a story, so let's say you have a guy and the guy goes, well, she was in the wrong, I'm in the right, right? And then you have the other side, which is the girl going, no, he's in the wrong, I'm in the right, right? The truth usually falls somewhere in the center. Okay, so in the example of my own family, my own father and mother, my dad's side said that my mom's side was the enemy, they were the devil, Dad's side said mom's side was the devil, right? So what was the truth? The truth was both sides had sins, both sides made crucial mistakes in that divorce. Both sides made error. Both sides were human. Both sides still loved us, but both sides made mistakes. So that's where the truth lies, is in the center of the two stories being told. Okay, in that example. Okay, but in this example, the truth lies with who actually was there present versus what Pontius Pilate is being told, because I'm pretty sure what the high priests are doing is they're taking the truth and they're twisting and warping it into what they want it to be. So in effort to kill Christ, to get Christ out of the way, but little did they know that by killing Christ, they're actually fulfilling God's law. And they're only making it, they're only helping Christ accomplish his plan. Okay, so in other words, the enemy is attempting to stop Christ, but Christ is actually using the enemy's plans in unity with his own plans in order to fulfill what he desires. And this is what this is connected to in the Bible when it says, all things I purpose for your good, right? I plan good for your life. Even the attacks of the enemy are for your good. Okay, that's a good example of what I just said as being a good example of even the bad things in life being used for your good. Example: my kids were wrongly ripped out of my life because of lies that my kid's mother told, and people that believed those lies, right? And because of that, I haven't seen my kids. But out of that wrong action, Christ used good for me to understand how Christ sees us and longs for us and misses us more deeply, and to also better understand my own mother and what she went through. Okay, so continuing on, Christ said, Jesus Christ answered. It says Jesus answered, but we know he's Christ. My kingdom is not of this world. In other words, my followers do not belong to this world. If my kingdom were on this world, my servants would fight so that I should not be delivered into the Jews. In other words, if my angels were here, I would not be here. You would not get me if this was my kingdom. This is not my kingdom. This is the devil's kingdom. Okay? My servants would fight for me so that I should not be delivered to the Jews. So why is God letting you go through problems? Why is God letting you go through issues? Why is God putting you in a fire to make you a stronger sword? Because one day will come when we will have to fight for our belief in the Lord. We will have to fight for our faith in the Lord. We will have to fight for what we believe. Okay, and this may happen before we die. It may happen figuratively before we die, where we have to fight against the government for what we believe, to stand up for what's right and what's just. It may be we have to fight against being wrongly accused of things or whatever. We even have to fight against the enemy while we're here on earth. But I think that there's also going to be a battle afterwards where we're going to be tempted or where we have to do some sort of fighting, because I don't think that he's just going to make us into a soldier in this world. Because here's what I'm thinking. I don't think Christ is making you into a soldier for faith just for this tiny little bit of time on this earth. I think he's preparing you for here and also to be a soldier in heaven. Okay? We're going to be like the angels in heaven as far as our body goes. Now, there's a verse here, but he says, so that I would not be delivered to the Jews, but now my kingdom is not from here. So the verse here is Daniel chapter 2, verse 44. Daniel chapter 2, verse 44. Okay. We're almost done. Daniel chapter 2, verse 44. Okay. And letting little mama know, there's that verse and then one more after it. Pilate therefore said to him, are you a king then? Are you a king? Jesus answered him, says, you say rightly that I am a king. In other words, I'm a king, but I'm not a king of this world. I'm not king of, my kingdom is not here. I'm not a king of anything on this planet. Okay? For this cause I was born. For the purpose of showing that I'm the king, I was born. And for this cause I have come into the world, that I should bear witness of the truth. Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice. Now that's connected to the verse that my sheep hear my voice and they listen to me. Okay. And the voice is the voice of God speaking to your heart, convicting you to change you, to make you something new. And this verse here that we're looking for is Isaiah chapter 55, verse 4. So to say them both again, Daniel chapter 2, verse 44. That's the one about my kingdom is not of this world. And then we have Isaiah chapter 55, verse 4. Okay. Isaiah chapter 55, verse 4, which is, I'm here to bear witness to the truth. Anyone who is of the truth, anyone who is born of the truth, basically meaning anyone who is born of the same spirit of God that inhabits all believers hears my voice. They hear me talking to them. Okay. Whether it's in their mind, in their heart, in their spirit, whatever. They hear me talking. They hear me talking through the circumstances they go through in life. They hear me talking through the Bible when they read it. They hear me talking to them in the quiet moments when they're struggling with temptations or whatever. Okay. They hear me talking. Pilate said to Jesus, what is this truth? I don't understand what this truth is. What is this truth? Okay. And when he had said this, he went out again to the Jews. Okay. He went out again to the Jews. Pilate went out again to the Jews and said to them, I find no fault in him at all. That would basically mean he's blameless. He has no wrong in him whatsoever. There's no sin in him. I find no fault. I find no reason to kill him. Okay. And so then, but you have a custom. So then Pontius Pilate realizes that the Jews have a custom around Passover. And he said, but you have a custom that I should release someone to you at the Passover, right? Do you therefore want me to release to you the King of the Jews? And they all cried again, saying, not this man, but Barabbas. Now, Barabbas was a robber and a murderer. Okay. He had many plans for uprisings and stuff. Okay. He was not a clean man whatsoever. He was a very, very evil man, very bad purposed man. Okay. And ladies and gentlemen, that is the end of chapter 18. So I will see you again for tomorrow when we read chapter 19, which is the soldiers mocking Jesus, Pilate's decision to crucify him, the king Jesus on the cross, and the mother of Jesus, and then him saying it is finished, and then Jesus being buried in Joseph's tomb. Okay, so that's what we're going to read on Shabbat. Okay, on my Shabbat. So I will see you guys again later. Have a blessed Friday. I will see you again when I wake back up for the next one, or shortly after I wake back up. Thank you, little mama, for your undying service to the ministry. I greatly appreciate you.